panels, that's always helpful. So let's get started, shall we? Any questions? Anyone have questions so far for the day? I want to introduce our first panel up here. 1,148 days later, recovery updates from the Labor Day 2020 communities. Actually, the way we're going to do this first group is they're going to report out from their table. So I'm going to introduce Michael Morter. Michael, where are you? There you are. Okay, come on up. Michael is serving as Oregon's wildfire recovery, has served as Oregon's wildfire recovery ombudsman. And that was the pinnacle of Michael's public service career, which spanned 3 decades and 2 states. Since retiring from the state, Michael has been consulting in the wildfire recovery space, currently guiding Lane County's Homes for Good, that's our housing agency, Homes for Good, and its acquisition of 20 modular units for Lazy Days. He's also helped to advise the framework for this summit today. I got to tour, Michael, with you on the McKenzie recovery tour just a couple weeks ago, and appreciate all the work that you're doing. So Michael's going to lead us with this first panel. Take it away.
Very good. Thank you. Mic'd up? We good? Yeah. Very good. Thank you. Yeah, so Steve mentioned, I had the opportunity to serve as the state's ombudsman. I see a lot of familiar faces in this room and really appreciate what you are all doing to put the state back on its feet. So what we have for you today, this panel, is really highlights from the communities. I wish we had hours for this. We don't. But we've asked key folks from the areas to just present what they've experienced, highlights, and what does it look like from those areas. They will be standing from the table. So this is in recognition of the expertise isn't up here sitting on the dais at this point. They're among you. So please take note and introduce yourselves if you see an opportunity later to connect. So I'll start with Eric Swanson, City Manager of Phoenix, and he's been a real stalwart in this effort, longtime City Manager down in Southern Oregon. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm City Manager of Phoenix. Our event was Alameda Fire. So if you're looking at any information on the websites, Alameda Fire is where you need to look. I mean, I think of all the Labor Day fires, I think ours was more acutely urban interface. We had lost a lot of structures, close to 700-800 structures in the city. 2,800 total in the county between City of Talent and in Jackson County unincorporated. So significant loss, residential, commercial, and multifamily. I guess from a good news perspective, we've had a lot of recovery. Close to 84% of our homes have been permitted occupancy. Same way with our multifamily. Our commercial, though, is lagging significantly, and our mobile home housing is also lagging significantly. So we have a lot of work to do. I think what I would characterize some of our successes are because we were able to plus up our staffing levels using MWAP funding. If we hadn't, I don't know what we had that resource available to us. I don't know where we would be in terms of the road to recovery. And that need continues on. We've done some urban growth boundary expansion, some annexation as part of this recovery effort. And the need for having the staffing is really going to be important. So as we look for policy decisions going forward, MWAP, House Bill 5006 really provided us with a lot of that staffing that's really was important, as well as some other investments. We're right now building a brand new public safety city hall, which includes both police and fire facility using state funding and some federal funding. So that's a huge investment for this small town like Phoenix, 4,500 population, and growing. And so thanks to our state legislators for providing that type of funding for us. Other investments that that came along that again we need to continue. Again, I talked about staffing. I think it's also important as we look at recovery, especially during this timeline 2020 September. We had a lot of ARPA funding and those kind of things that were available to kind of meet the need for some of that emergency funding that became available. I would suggest as policymakers, state policymakers, that we maybe look at a future rainy day fund or some funding that's available, because I think that's really what's critical in terms of our recovery and future recovery. Because I think even though this was an extraordinary event, I think these events will be occurring more often, and having that funding available was critically important. Look forward to the rest of the discussion today. One thing I'll just throw out there just real quickly and ending is this CDBG DR funding. I think it's something else that we need to take a look at it. We're calling it peer funding. Some of you other jurisdictions probably have been involved in this process. We are working on that in Jackson County with our representatives. I think something that needs to be take another look at is, instead of a 90-10 split, 90% being housing and 10% being this peer funding for the $420 million of CDBG DR money that was given to the state. Perhaps maybe shifting that. We've taken another look at whether there needs to be more funding for some of these economic and development initiatives. So, and I know we're going to have somebody from CDBG DR talking about that. So thank you.
Thanks, Eric. And I'll also say early on in my work down in Southern Oregon, I met with Eric and his community development director, Joe Slaughter, had noted their permitting system was an older system, and they came on board with the state system, and that was a great partnership. So really appreciate the work that you guys did there. Next up, we'll have Caryn Wheeler-Clay, Executive Director of the Jackson County Long-Term Recovery Group. Thanks, Caryn.
Thank you so much for having me here. Yeah, so I thank you, Eric, for giving that sort of jurisdictional overview, and I can give something similar for the other jurisdictions that are not able to speak at this time. You know, our residential recovery ranges between 25 and 44% recovered, right? When we talk about commercial recovery, it's between 28 and 30% recovered. Buried in all of that are the people. Right. And that's really what long-term recovery groups are focused on, our neighbors. So I wish I had better news for you. I would much rather be talking about the successes of recoveries, the recovery dashboard that standardizes definitions across our disaster impacted jurisdictions of Phoenix, Talent, and Jackson County, the nation's first multi-jurisdictional disaster recovery plan that we delivered on last Monday. But all of this takes a backseat to the very real challenges that our survivors and workforce are experiencing as the chasm between expectations and realities grow. As we continue to field messages that include things are complex and there's been a delay, we experience the increasing need of emotional and spiritual care supports. At the onset of these fires, many of us were at the front lines responding to the estimated 40,000 neighbors that were evacuated from their homes. We heard from communities and organizations and agency heads that recovery would take years, possibly decades. And yet on the ground, we find ourselves becoming contortionists and magicians as we squeeze blood out of turnips in order to meet the demands of a recovery as resources and assistance dries up. As the winds shift to the latest crisis, the need for support was yesterday, but we would gladly take it today. So the invitation buried in all of this is to work closely alongside your communities, as we are the experts in what we have experienced, and we don't want other communities to go through this. So the invitation is to help us help you figure out how to do disaster better, at the same time that you continue to prioritize securing funding to help our communities thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Caryn. It strikes home for many of us, and I really appreciate that. Our next presenter and someone who's become a close friend in these challenging times, Deana Freres, who is the president of the board of the Santiam Long-Term Recovery Group. Some of you may know the last name Freres, multi-generational timber family in the Canyon. And what I appreciate about them is not only are they serious as an employer, they're serious about the community that they live in. And so with that, Deana.
I just want to start by saying ditto. Everything Caryn said so eloquently. Thank you so much. So my name is Deana Freres. I'm with the Santiam Canyon Long-Term Recovery Group. We are recovering from the 2020 Beachy Creek and Lion's Head fire. Sometimes we're called the Santiam fire. It was a hot mess, literally and figuratively, Labor Day weekend in 2020. Our current organization's active in individual household recovery. So as the nature of a long-term recovery group, we are focused on the individual households recovering. So that's pretty much what I'll be able to update you on today. Our organization's currently active, if not leading, is definitely our Santiam Disaster Services team. We've got 3 representatives here today, and they are housed and really working at the pleasure of Santiam Hospital and Clinics, who was absolutely instrumental in our early days of response. So we're very grateful for that and to have funding to continue their services. And any successes that we've had, I can confidently say, are as a result of that team being in place and doing intake before any of us existed, like the days after the fire. They stepped up and have been able to continue, and their continuity of service and the funding that's been able to support that is the key to the successes that we've had so far in the canyon. So I just can't say enough about that team. So if you want details and how to be successful, I will always defer and point. They're sitting at the table there, Melissa and Patty and Colleen. So let's see. The LTRG right now is currently hosting the unmet needs table, right? So that's our main role as we're 3 years in. At least weekly, we're hosting funders to fill the gap needs for individual households that are striving to recover. And those numbers right now, I'm really excited to report that we have 266 households closed, which means their recovery needs are met, and some we lost through attrition, but as households moved on. But we do have 91 remaining active households seeking funding and recovery to meet their recovery needs. And of those open households, 12 are renting families, and the rest, so I think that's around 79, are primary homeowners that are actively recovering. So as far as our working partners, obviously the disaster services team, our counties, we're cross-jurisdictional in our fire. We have Lynn County and Marion County. I don't know, I'm sure there might be some more representatives here, but from both of those. And I would say that's another success, was that those 2 counties worked, at least from our perspective, as citizens and recovery, that it's been pretty seamless. And so we really applaud that from the early days. All 6 commissioners were actively involved and still are. So we appreciate that. And then of course, all of the county agencies, right, that are supporting. Yes, we still have the support, and we're very appreciative of the myriad of state agencies that are involved in individual household recovery. And I think as far as successes, again, the continuity of service from day one from our case management team, but also I'm sitting with Jim White, Nonprofit Association of Oregon, came alongside us really, really early, provided funding in that capacity to stand up the LTRG. And I know he did, the agency did for most of the state. So we appreciate that. And then also all that low barrier funding that came early on from OCF, Oregon Community Foundation, Ford Family Foundation, and Meyer Memorial Trust. That triumvirate absolutely catalyzed our recovery. So the important piece of that, I hope everyone in this room hears, is that that funding was very low barrier. It was immediate. There was a lot of trust put in the teams on the ground. And so whenever we can lean and point towards that model, we'd like everyone in the room to think about the things that worked well with that teamwork there. And then we also were very, very fortunate, if not blessed, if not smiled upon. We had a large surge of private dollars that came early to support our community. And with our local hospitals leadership, we were able to harness that, leverage that, and provide that early on. Again, low barrier, absolutely responsive to communities' needs. So those are our successes. Our needs, funding, right? Some continued capacity, even as we're tapering off. We're not done. We're not anywhere close to done. So we'll need some capacity funding consideration. And then also for the households that are still seeking recovery that will not be eligible for CDBG, DR, or some of the other funding that's available right now, there's a gap that we need to figure out how to fill for those households. Lessons learned, this is a new one. It's kind of a tender thing personally for me that I, looking back, wish that we had done a better job, and myself even personally had done a better job really understanding the definition of disaster recovery needs as in contrast to normal social services support that a community needs. And they're different, and those differences really are important, I think, for the community to understand, for our legislators to understand, for our funders to understand that the fire didn't really discriminate. In fact, it didn't discriminate at all. And so to put barriers on funding based on different categories is very obstructive to a community's holistic recovery. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Deana. And I would echo from my experience with somebody at boots on the ground in all the fire impacted counties, the collaboration between Marion County and Lynn County commissioners was absolutely seamless. And that could have been so complicated from a planning and zoning standpoint to building permits and the like, and it really worked well. The second thing as a takeaway, and you'll hear from Melissa Bauer tomorrow, but I really hold out the Santiam Hospital and their work prior to the disaster as really being a key building block in the community. So again, hats off, Melissa and team. Next up, I have Michelle Caryn, who's the Executive Director of the Klamath and Lake County Long-Term Recovery Group. And what I want folks to think about here, we had some hellacious fires in 2020. That wasn't the end of it for our friends in Klamath County. They've had subsequent fires that didn't fit the same thresholds of assistance. And so I think what you'll hear from Michelle is how challenging that's been when, on one hand, you've got help is arriving in terms of that support, and now you're on your own.
Yep.
So, Michelle, thank you.
Hello, everyone. So I am Michelle, the Executive Director of the Klamath and Lake Long-Term Recovery Group. And so, yes, the 242 wildfire that hit Chiloquin, Oregon in 2020 was destructive to say the least. With that, it was tied into the Alameda fire funding. So the barriers faced were not the same as the ones that were faced when recovering from the 2021 bootleg and the 2023 Golden Fire. During our response to the bootleg wildfire that affected our population, it felt a lack of community support and a sense of abandonment. Notably, at that time, there was no operational long-term recovery group, and it took 6 months to a year to establish one. Furthermore, the Oregon Department of Human Services, Office of Resilience and Emergency Management did not have the capacity to bring local leadership to the region until the social service emergency liaison position was filled with a local community leadership. So there was no local leadership involved in the community recovery community from the disaster to bring resources to the table until 6 months into the response. Due to the lack of the local knowledge and relationships, we lost the true foothold to response and respect in the community. A key distinguishing feature between our area's wildfire disasters and those of a larger scale lies in the demographic disparities, rendering us ineligible for state funding or FEMA assistance. Our population's off-grid lifestyle in mountains regions typically precludes us from accessing the financial resources that are readily available for the recovery of larger scale disasters. Instead, we must rely on support from donors, community contributions, and grant applications. In the context of the 2023 Golden Fire, many of the barriers persist, but a pivotal achievement is the prompt activation of the LTRG and OREM. With the work and the support of the OREM staff and the LTRG, the community partners needed to assist in the response were brought to the table. Community partners such as community care organizations, Cascade Health Alliance, and others across the state, such as Oregon VOAD, have brought resources for housing, unmet needs, and basic services to our survivors. We had housing and resources for folks in the matter of days, not months. This timely response made survivors feel acknowledged, reinforcing the significance of their experiences and reassuring they were not isolated in their ordeal. In working in rural communities, the ability to bring a known community leader is a huge undertaking and if you want other resources to come to the table, otherwise you lose very valuable time and fail to address their survivors' needs. We were 6 months to a year behind in having that with bootleg fire survivors, but through that work, we made sure we had it in place for our next round of survivors, and our response and recovery for Golden truly shows that work.
Michelle. I think it's really important as someone who grew up in a very rural area myself, that those of you who represent state and federal agencies take this opportunity to really tune in to where these gaps are in our rural areas because they're significant. So reach out as you have that opportunity and more time to engage with the folks you're hearing speak from these rural communities today. Next up, is one of my favorite electeds. Absolutely grassroots politics in action in terms of a very much service focus to the work she brings to the table on a daily basis. Commissioner Kaety Jacobson from Lincoln County. Oh, you're right there. I just, at the risk of embarrassing the commissioner, I just really appreciated how your honesty and the connection with the community. Every time I got a call, I knew I was speaking with someone that brought the community to the table. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. My pleasure to work with you as well. So I'm Kaety Jacobson. I'm, excuse me, one of the 3 Lincoln County commissioners and the one that's really been the lead on wildfire recovery efforts. So we had the Echo Mountain fire in September of 2020, which was located in Otis, Oregon, kind of on the northeast corner of Lincoln County, which is all in the unincorporated part of Lincoln County. There is no incorporated city up there. We are a coastal county. We are not used to wildfire. Other than very historical burns, such as the Tillamook burn in 1933. We also know that Lincoln County had a very historical burn, probably back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and we only know that through stories of tribal members. So we are not used to coastal wildfire. We lost 300 homes. Our fire absolutely did discriminate, and it hit basically all of our North County workforce and affordable housing properties that we had. Successes, community partners. I think we've already heard a lot about that today. Huge success with our community partners, long-term recovery groups, Salmon River Grange, Cascade Relief Team, Lincoln County Legal Aid, OSU Extension, Community Services Consortium, to name a few, as well as some internal county departments. Other successes, septic inspections and repairs. That was our first program that the county got up and running, and we had it running within 8 months after the fire. Through funding we received from the Oregon legislature and the budget readjustment process later to get more money through ARPA funding. At this point, we have pretty much all of our wildfire affected properties done if they wanted to be done. Everyone's been outreached to, everyone has had the opportunity, and we're actually using some of that funding now to reach out beyond wildfire properties because we've reached just about everybody. Huge lift. Big thank you to OSU Extension and their septic repair program for helping us with that. Other, I think, success we've had was mentioned earlier is ARPA funding. I cannot stress how beneficial the timing of ARPA money hitting counties and hitting the state was to wildfire recovery, because you could use that for a lot of infrastructure projects. We received around $40 million in ARPA funding from the state that we used for things like rebuilding an entire water system. I don't know that those things would have happened if ARPA money wasn't floating around at the time of the fire. We also had other success with state funding, such as the Municipal Wildfire Assistance Program, which was through the e-board. We also had a hotel purchase through Project Turnkey, so several of those I would say were successes. What still needed, case management at a local level and ongoing, certainly need that. Lesson learned, case management jumping around from the state, Catholic Charities, other organizations didn't work. If I could go back to day one, I would have just hired case managers through Health and Human Services and billed the state and kept those people the whole time. You know, other lessons learned, I saw this meme on Facebook, and it was a bunch of people standing around a hole at a construction site, all of them with safety vests on, all of them had little titles like project director, communications manager, HR manager, and there was one person actually in the hole with a shovel, and that person's label was local guy with a shovel. And that's what it feels like going through wildfire recovery as a local government, is that you are that one person in the hole with a shovel. And while there's lots of people and agencies, I don't mean to pick on agencies standing around trying to give you guidance, the most valuable help is those that find a shovel and get in the hole with you. And the best partners are the ones that are adaptable and willing to pick up the shovel, even if they've never done it before. And so I think the lesson learned for everybody here is learn to pick up a shovel. If you're with an agency that hasn't done that before, I certainly had never picked up a shovel in the way I have with this project. What's still needed for us besides case management, flexible money for housing? I think CDBG money, which we're talking about later today, is certainly going to be helpful, but it's not going to be flexible just because of the nature of the HUD dollars. We need local money, probably state general fund money or foundation money, where our case managers and local people that know those families have the ability to make calls based on extenuating circumstances. That's the only way we're going to get people housed. Kind of box checking programs like CDBG, certainly going to be valuable. There's going to be people that don't meet all the boxes and are still going to be unhoused. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Great picture on the shovel piece, because that really is, I think, key, again, back to state agencies and federal folks that are in the room. That's really important when you're sending staff out. It's one thing if they have advice and guidance, but make sure they're empowered to shovel as well, please. Next up, someone who represents an area near and dear to my heart. My family and I have been lucky enough for decades now to camp up in the McKenzie River and just consider that kind of our summer home, if you will, whether it's a teardrop or a tent. And so I'd like to introduce Devin Thompson. Where's Devin? Oh, there he is. Executive Director of the McKenzie Long-Term Recovery Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I'm Devin Thompson, Executive Director, McKenzie Valley Long-Term Recovery Group. I'm not going to hit on the highlights. Sorry about that. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to stand by two of our case managers because I want to hit on a couple things. This weekend has been kind of challenging for me and I'm struggling a little bit. So I apologize for that. Our community lost 517 dwellings and several businesses. Approximately 30% of those have been rebuilt so far. That is why I want to take a moment of silence for all communities impacted by the 2020 fires and think about your most vulnerable populations and the impact it has had on them. This weekend, we had one of our elderly individuals there in a tragic accident. We're not quite sure where things are going to go from here. You know, they've been in a 21-foot trailer for the last 3 years. So it's really thinking about that population and where we're at and how do we really look at that. In the McKenzie Valley, for us, it's an aging population. And how do we stand up and look out after that aging population? And our case managers this weekend, once again, have had to endure this and the elderly individuals that we have lost along the way. This is why we are all here. This is why we are all doing the work that we are doing. And I appreciate each and every one of you. I want to give a big shout out. Ed Flick is here. thank you so much. DHS, thank you for everything. Tara, thank you. County, thank you. But there's a long road ahead for us. And I appreciate each and every one of you. And my 5 minutes isn't up yet. So Michael, will you take 20 seconds and just have a moment of silence for the ones that we have not been able to touch yet, or we need to touch? Thank you.
Thank you, Devin. I appreciate that. And my heart goes out to my friends upriver. I know that work continues on. So keep up the good work, please. Next on the list, we have Jeana Beam with Glide Revitalization. Early on in the recovery efforts, I was lucky enough to work with someone else at Glide, Abby, who was quite a character and really helped me ground truth information in Douglas County. So I know there have been a lot of changes for them. It's been evolving. Glide Revitalization was around pre-fire. They're another group that's had to pivot. So Jeana, you're on.
So anybody that knows me knows I hate being in front of people or speaking, but I couldn't get anybody else to do it today. Yeah. So there's nothing I can stand up here and say that everybody else hasn't already said. It's the same group of people to think, the same struggles everybody's had. We've all had the same losses. We've had elderly people that are living in trailers. We've stood on properties with individuals that spent 35 years building something that now they live in a tiny apartment in town, and they're never going to get back to that property. There's a few things I want to touch on. We talked about, we've had a lot of changes in our organization. Without the people that were there initially, we wouldn't be where we are now. Allison was our executive director at the time, and she was absolutely instrumental in everything that we've accomplished so far. Our partnerships with the county and everything else, just like everyone else has said, without those, we wouldn't have made any progress. We had about 109 homes that were lost initially, and we've rebuilt 14. Out of those, we think there's a big percentage that won't ever rebuild, which means that all of that is lost up there, as well as we live along the scenic byway. What our tiny little unincorporated town depended on was people coming up to see it, and now there's nothing to see. So not only are we focused on the individuals, we're focused on how do we keep this town alive? Because between the logging industry and this fire and the ones we've had since then, there's starting to be a lot left in our community. I think the need for continuity with caseworkers is huge. We need faces that people know and trust, and we need to not be telling them every 3 months, we don't know if we're going to be able to continue paying you. When a program takes 6 or 8 months to get off the ground, that means that we lose good people that have been there from the beginning because they also have a family to take care of. I think it's important too that we stress this didn't just affect low income. We have a whole group of people that are median income that were as equally as affected by this disaster, and they don't have resources available to them. I think that that's been said by a couple of other people, that it's important that we recognize that, and that low barrier funds are absolutely essential in there being a rebuild. We are a state that has continued to celebrate its diversity and uniqueness in individuals, but we continue to put out programs that force us to treat individuals as all the same. Every single survivor and property is different. And until we get programs and funding that also recognizes that, we're going to continue to fail. So that's about all I have.
Thank you, Jeana. Well said. And appreciate the work that you folks did early on and continue to do down in Douglas County. Our next presenter, are we live to go to Jamila now? Available? All right. Oh, there we go. Excellent. Next up is Jamila Wilson, who is United Way to offer some statewide perspectives. Jamila, you're on.
Thank you, Michael. And I also want to thank Jim White for including us in this conversation. As all of the presenters have shared, this is an ongoing recovery process. Our work at United Way is focused on a statewide leadership network for leaders of color, particularly leaders of color who are serving communities that were impacted by the 2020 wildfire. We recently did some interviews in partnership with Professor Heidi Huber Stearns. She's there today at the University of Oregon, and we collaborated with a group of graduate students, and were able to interview a number of our members who were working during the time of the wildfires. And one of the quotes that really stood out was specific to communication and interpretation and translation, specific to the Oregon alerts. And I'm just going to read the quote directly. It says, even if it's bilingual English and in Spanish, what about all the other people? What if you're Russian? What if you're from Vietnam? Can we begin to think about this differently? So there's definitely frustration for sure. So this is an area that we can continue to improve. One of the things that our network has been able to do is really hone in and focus on wellness, mental health supports, and particularly including a trauma-informed perspective and practice. So in that, over the last 2 years, we've been able to provide funding through our resilience grants for communities that are recovering. I just want to highlight 3 communities, particularly Unite in Jackson County. They were able to use resources to support a staff wellness retreat. So after their staff had been supporting over 650 families, there was a need to restore and rejuvenate the spirit and the will of its staff. And so they were able to use funding to support that. Another CBO in the area, Road Climate, that are in Jackson and Coos County, they organized a number of community gatherings. Of course, at that time, we were navigating multiple disasters, including the pandemic. And so rebuilding community resilience through social connectedness was very important. And a third organization, LULAC, who were able to provide leadership development training for 20 mothers that were affected by the fires. These mothers, 7 of those 20 mothers were able to join the school site council in Phoenix Talent School District. And I want to, wrap up my remarks by just highlighting that these mothers and families, particularly in the Talent Phoenix area, they have been deeply stressed and greatly impacted by the slow moving nature of recovery. They've commented and shared about how their children are impacted. And we're seeing it through their test scores that families have been separated from their communities, and that thankfully the school is there to offer that institutional support, that community support. There's, been challenges with the Royal Oaks Mobile Manor in Phoenix, and families are still waiting for some resolution to get back into homes. And the final sort of piece I want to leave you with is the ask of these families is to put the onus back on the state, on the county, on the municipal and regional governments, to not burden the families more with paperwork that they have to constantly relive and be re-traumatized. So as resources are being allocated out, that it is the responsibility of these government entities to get those resources to the people, as opposed to the people constantly demanding it for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamila. We will be hearing from Jamila tomorrow in a longer presentation. I look forward to that and really appreciate the work that they did. The examples she cited were really critical in those communities. So with that, I'm looking for a handoff to the next MC.
He's out in the hall talking to us.
Okay, very good. I'll turn that over. Thank you.
All right.